So we have a pretty long essay here, and it might be a little bit tricky for you because the structure made up is clear as you'd expect. But this is an essay called "Live and Learn: Why We Have College" by Louis Menand, written almost 10 years ago now, 2011. Now, Menand starts out by talking about his experience at Ivy League colleges. Now, in Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Dartmouth, Cornell, a few others. The business of college was just taken for granted. The students who went there fairly homogenous, they're really motivated, etc. Manan moved over to a public university, though, like University of Washington or Washington State or even Western or something like that. He was asked a question by a student, which is, why do we have to read this book? And he really thinks that's a poignant question. Why do we have to read this book? What's the value of it? And so he uses that as a starting point to explore and sketch out a few of the reasons. It's important to notice that he's not necessarily promoting any of these ideas yet. He's just trying them out, being curious, open minded. The first had to do with college being a sort of a sorting mechanism. Who's intelligent, who's not? You get a degree, it suggests that you have a certain kind of intelligence because it's really hard to measure this. So if you're an employer or government trying to hire somebody, guy with a college degree, almost inevitably was a guy in the old days, was the one who you would hire because they proved that they could do that kind of thinking, in other words. So it's a kind of a merit badge, lets the world know who can do what. The second, he said, has to do with learning about the world, like Appiah's Utopia or King's Culture. Menand's art says here that college's purpose is to help people become more civic minded, share a sense of what it means to be a nation. He calls those theory one and theory two. He then looks at a bit of history about the way colleges became much more democratic and open, and because of that, we have a whole new set of questions. If we're bringing more and more people in, then are students actually learning anything? And so he then addresses a couple of um, studies which have shown that there it is, academically adrift by Aram and Roska. Roxa, sorry. Academic Drift came out, I don't know when, 2007, something like that. And it was highly controversial because it argued that students in colleges actually weren't learning anything. He does a pretty good job of looking at the controversy, recognizing the test used by Roxa and the Aram really only looked it was somewhat limited and looked at what students learned after only less than 2 years in college, etc. But it did raise a lot of questions. What do students actually get from this collection of classes they're taking? It then offers theory three, and the theory three is the idea that in the modern world, colleges help students learn specialized knowledge, finance, engineering, that kind of thing. In other words, it's a kind of finishing trade school for the modern world because things are just so difficult now. You just don't walk into a Wall Street job and learn on the job. College companies don't do that anymore. He then takes what looks like uh, um, a tangent, and he looks at what Professor X wrote an article for Atlantic, and he called "In the Basement of the Ivory Tower." And he basically argues, Professor X does, that lots of students in his classes had no business being in college. Now, Professor X had a very narrow view of what college meant, but it was controversial, and because it flies in the face of what we want to believe, that is, college is for everybody and colleges should be for everybody. I hold that belief. But theory three then has to do with the demands of us. Addressing that question of whether college is for everybody, whether you hold a theory one, two, or three. By opening the doors to colleges, you seem to throw into question what those values are, what those theories, how effective those theories are. He glosses through, I think, the response that Professor X would have, which is a tracking approach, that is, academic track or vocational track, as they do in Europe very often. Sometimes students are shunted into one of those two tracks as early as middle school, and that would certainly be tough to do in America. But that is kind of what Professor X suggests. Then he closes by saying, okay, given all of that, college used to mean something in the old day, and but not so much anymore as we've thrown open the doors to colleges, trying to. And so he wants to know, given what colleges used to be in the 20th century, what are colleges now? And asking that question, he suggests, is maybe what it is the function of all of it right there. And he ends with that. He's hoping that students continue to ask themselves that question and come up with their own views, their own beliefs, stay motivated. Okay, so he's got those three big theories, and then he gives a nice context about the larger controversy. Are we learning anything? What? Why?